The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good evening, everybody, from the Temple of Silence. It is sometimes very silent here, but not when I'm talking, I'm afraid. Just so I do remember it, tomorrow morning, 6 a.m. GMT, we have the Science of Triangles. It's basically a evening schedule, so the kind of little extras that I have in there take place in the morning. So Science of Triangles will take place in the morning, and there in your chat box is the link in case you don't already have it. Well, it's nice to see you here, and we've just had a board meeting with the SRI, USR, Moria Federation, and everybody has really gone through it the last couple of weeks with the festival week of the new group of world servers and the the Christmas activities for the esoteric advent, and just many things. So I guess we're all trying to recover just a little bit here. And I just want to welcome you, Anne and Antoinette and Brennan and Damien and Frederick and George and Heike and Judy, it is, I think so. Then Lorraine, Mariut and Risto, and Stephen Renneberg is there, and Tia and Vera and Veronica, and Michael is giving me a hand here to make sure I stay on the straight and narrow path. Well, our universe is an amazing thing, and beyond our universe, or any universe, is something far more amazing. You might even not be inclined to think about it. Something that has no limits, for which limits are impossible. The boundless, the boundless immutable principle. So the minute you talk about a bound or a bind or circumference or something of that nature, you have limits. And almost everything we have to do within life, well, has its limits. One thing is outlined against another. I'm looking right now, right through here, at a big, beautiful wooden statue of the Christ. It's maybe 3 feet tall or more. And I'm looking at it against the background of a blue chair. Now, why do I see it that way? Why do I see one thing against another with boundaries? Well, there are many things about our perceptual apparatus and the apparent constituents, atomic, molecular, and so forth, of which these apparently two items are composed, and I just see boundaries. But what would it be like to, keep up the practicality and continue living in this world of Maya? Most mysterious is Maya and forever, says the great sage Shankara, and I always add cyclically forever. I feel I have to add that. So we have to deal with Maya, always cyclically. But more mysterious than Maya is this, the absolute deity, and that's not the absolute quite yet, but the absolute deity, which is absolutely infinite and yet homogeneous, out of which Maya comes. You know, that absolute deity is kind of a supra-universal Maya. I mean, in other words, let's just say that everything is Maya unless it's the absolute. Think about that for just a second. So that means even these great spiritual states that we strive after are non-relatively Maya, which is astonishing because, you know, we live half our eternal life in Maya, and who knows if it's half or how timing is kept in the great breath. But if you're worried or thinking about your immortality, you've at every possible moment in what we call time, you have been already immortal forever. And there's so many strange thoughts that go into what is probably a lot more real than the relativism of Maya. Maya is this and that, you know. It's all these fragments which are born of self-perception. The great deity looks at itself, and every possibility arises, except the possibility that it is not. We don't have possibilities of canceling out eternal reality. So, you know, we may be having a tough time, easy time as a personality. We may be feeling like we're making progress or not making progress, but as I've often said, you are the graduate of more universes than you can ever number. You would just keep going and going and going and going and going, and you wouldn't be able to number them. Maybe you would, like Georg Cantor, he was, you know, in mathematics, the great infinitist. And he died insane, but that was maybe for other reasons. He would name and give symbols to these great infinities that he was detecting. So, you know, maybe the hardest thing that thought can ever deal with is the concept of infinity, because it just reduces all your other concerns to practically nothing. And that type, in the book, I guess it's called Infinity. Oh, and I wish I could remember the author. I will remember later, but the man says, well, from my perspective, he says, there are two types of infinities. One is the mathematical infinity. And, you know, the people in the field of mathematics get all excited about that. And there's been a tremendous movement in that way towards the celebration of what certain great thinkers can come up with about infinity. Hilbert, Ramanujan, and of course Cantor at the top of them all. His horoscope was interesting in that regard because he was a Pisces, which is, you know, in some ways boundaryless, but then when you put his Jupiter and Uranus together in Aries, there is that endless oneness that endless expansion. We're all born for different things, and we work them out in a limited, finite situation, and our astral body gets happy about how it's going or unhappy. But I was just talking about a man, I realized, I said, my goodness, it's not that this man is happy or unhappy. He radiates joy. Well, joy is of the soul, bliss is of the spirit. He's on his way. Somehow he's captured joyfulness. And that is the goal for all of us, and there are different ways of appreciating it. Now, just to get us going a little bit, because we're in a section of our studies together where we are defining our terms, defining the indefinable. Voltaire is said to have said, let no man seek to converse with me unless he has defined his terms. So, he was a great genius, and in many ways, and probably a third-rate soul, and, lots of fourth-ray also. And so he was at home, whether he was writing fiction or whether he was dealing mathematically with things. Defining our terms. Now, we're going to continue that because we've been working on it, and it's very useful to give to the abstract mind and thence to the concrete mind something particular that gives you a handle on what these categories really are. And it's desirable. We never can contain reality with words, but if we can get a little closer and define what something is not, then we're closer to what it is, of course. So I just want you to ponder or try to get into the state of being, isness. I don't know how you would do it. I mean, I know what might work for me, but it's not necessarily something that's going to work for you. And we've been having these sessions about once a week, and even once a week is something to slip into this being. Now, the thing about it, I've mentioned it many times, but the habit is so strong that people can ignore what I'm saying about this. I'm saying that you have to ignore the form. Ignore the form. Now, that's quite a statement, because our life is very much form consumed, not just on the physical plane. When we look at the etheric plane, we say to ourselves, well, what's the pattern there? Is it a line? Is it a triangle? Is it a square? What is it? Those are forms. And we know that if we begin to see on the astral plane, as we do at night in dreams, or dreaming, clear dreaming, whatever kind of dreaming it is, those are forms that we're generating. And even if we hear music or see beautiful scenes, or things that are not too concrete, it's still a form. And we know that the mind is filled with thought forms. And when we find ourselves on the higher mental plane, we're presented with a form we call the Temple of Solomon, and we are as if within it. And another name is the egoic lotus, and there are forms there. So the most natural thing in the world is just to say, well, what is the form? What am I registering here? Now, I think it's probably going to show up one day that the whole universe is like a great egg. The egg is so often used as a symbol and even a factual basis for what that in which a universe evolves, or that from which a universe comes. We still have a form. But the higher we rise, the more we can relieve ourselves of over addiction to forms, where our attention is compelled by the form, and we forget the one behind the form. Now, one of the beautiful things to read, and maybe I've read it to you just a little bit somewhere, is I think the law of repulse under the fifth ray. And that's the big battle there, and man's mind is generically on the fifth ray. Generically, okay? Form behind me. Oh, well, let's see what happens. Oh, yeah. Well, this tells the story of what we're trying to free ourselves from, because it's the very substance of the problem between form and formlessness. And I have quite a few actually, videos, basically video commentaries on all these stanzas, and you can find them on Makara. Of course, maybe I could improve what I already said, perhaps. I think so. But such as it was 3 years ago, that's what I did. So the teacher says, toward me, I draw the garment of my God. You know what a garment is, you wear it. And it's not that upon which the garment is placed. If I put on a shirt, The garment is not what I put the shirt on. Same with a hat. A hat is not a head. I see and know his form. Now, who is my God? It can be any one of the great deities, a planet, a solar logos, the sun, the constellation, whatever. Toward me, I draw the garment of my God. I see and know his form. I take that garment. Now just imagine the fifth-rate scientist in the lab. I take that garment piece by piece. I know its shape and color, its form and type, its parts, components, and its purposes and use. I know a lot about the garment, don't I? I stand amazed. And this is important. I see naught else. It's a blinding to everything except the garment. I penetrate the mysteries of form, but not the mystery, capital mystery, italics mystery. Form has many mysteries. Look, we're trying to discover many things. You know, the cure for cancer, all of these viral diseases that are now on the loose. What do we do with them? Mysteries of form. But what's the mystery itself? I see the garment of my God. I see naught else. Now comes the teacher speaking. Love of the form is good, but only as the form is known for what it is, the veiling vase of life. So we're kind of changing our metaphor a little here, but the same idea. The sat, you know, sat chitananda. This is something is veiling the sat. Love of the form must never hide the life which has its place behind. The one who brought the form into the light of day and preserves it for his use. The one who lives and loves and serves the form. Most importantly for us right now, the one who is. The word goes forth from soul to form. That's always the way it is, you know, when you want to really correct something deep. The soul, solar angel, angel of the presence, has something to say and communicates it, and maybe you pick it up and then can solve the problem in which you find yourself. The soul goes, the word goes forth from soul to form. Behind that form, I am. Know me. Cherish and know and understand the nature of the veils of life. That's the garment, right? That's the vase. But know as well the one who lives. Not just the veil, but living being within. Know me. Let not the form of nature, the forms of nature, their processes and powers, prevent thy searching for the mystery, capital M, which brought the mysteries, lowercase m, to thee. Know well the form, but leave it joyously and search for me. That's exactly what we're doing. When I say to you, okay, friends, it's against the grain and it's against the habit nature of many years, but ignore the form. Ignore the form. It's very, for this type of exercise, it's secondary. For succeeding in the world of Maya, It's quite primary. Detach thy thought from form. Can we do that? Detach thy thought from form and find me waiting underneath the veils, the many-sided shapes, the clamors, and the thought forms which hide my real self. You see, friends, mostly we're not dealing with reality at all. We're just dealing with the garment, with the vase. We're just dealing with the veils, as he calls it, you know. Know well the form, but don't stop there. Find me, know me. Then use the forms, which then will neither veil nor hide the self, but will permit the nature of that self, capital S, to penetrate the veils of life, revealing all the radiance of God, including the God you are, His power, your power, and magnetism, revealing all there is of form, of life, of beauty and usefulness. The mind reveals the one. The mind can fuse and blend the form and life. And that's what we're, obviously, one of the things we're trying to do. And then the statement, take it to heart, and I mean heart, take it to heart. The mind alone will not do it. Thou art the one. Thou art the form. Thou art the mind. Know this. This is fantastic. And you know, it's found, as in so many revelatory explanations, it's found under the fifth ray. So, you know, like I've often said, the Tibetan has written one big book, and a new one's coming out. Oh, goodness. Many books will come out now, and they'll again be one big book, and you look at everything he's ever written, and it's all one big book. And where do you want to stand with respect to that fantastic revelatory hierarchical book? Where do you want to stand?
Michael, as you're talking about form, Friedrich has written in 2 comments, and it goes back about 10 minutes. It is energy, so no form is the first, and the second comment, music as wave energy.
Yes, I think that on a, Frederick, when we come to looking at the substratum of normal forms, the whole idea of wave and particle comes in for us, and these things can be even detected. And waves are subtle forms, and particles we'll see really what they are and from what angle, because apparently something is both wave and particle. And so this is true of some kind of substratum. It's all music. The whole universe is music. Pythagoras knew that. It's like saying the whole universe is sound, the whole universe is light. And inside the universe, you'll never arrive at a completely formless state, because the universe itself is a form. And inside absolute infinitude, which is a supra-universal state, you're not going to arrive at formlessness at first. You're going to see every possible form, including the infinitude of forms which have never been finitized, isolated into objectivity, never finitized. And it's just infinite, the number of forms there to be found. And you'll also see, as there is no sight going on in the absolute per se, you'll also see the utter sameness of absolute infinitude. Now, it seems like a contradiction, but there's only one perceiver that can perceive that. That the great absolute infinitude is absolutely the same in every respect. So, it just depends how far you want to go. In the universe, there are so many degrees of subtlety. You can climb and climb and climb, or intensify your vibration as you want to look at it that way, if you want to look at it that way. Everything gets more and more subtle, more and more subtle. But because the universe is itself a form, you're not going to achieve real formlessness in any universe. There's only one place where real formlessness exists, and do I wear out the patience by repeating that it is the absolute. These things require, do we think about them deeply? What we're presented with here in our myopic world is necessary. Probably for many reasons we don't understand. But it's actual without being real. If we define reality as that which is causeless and utterly the same and has existed forever and will so exist. And so the ideas are, they contradict our normal common sense. So, if I thought that all of this was just nonsense, and that you couldn't benefit from it, and that I couldn't, I would not bother you with it. But back in '91, almost 30 years ago, we had a small group. It was associated with AUM, Ancient Universal Mysteries, of which Keith Bailey is the director. And we met and we talked about deep things. And it came to my mind, why not really go into this thou art that, but go into it in a way that was not book knowledge. So what did I do? Of course, I bought a book, right? Tiny little book. I carry it with me. It's just falling apart, And it was all about Shankara. And basically, Master Moria says, look, one is the Eastern Hemisphere and one is the Western Hemisphere. I'm not quite sure how he did it, but Shankara and the Buddha are like two hemispheres. And of course, sometimes we read that the Christ and the Buddha The Christ is the West and the Buddha is the East. But in the East, Shankara is the unitist, what can I call it? He's the oneist. He doesn't allow diversity. He eradicates diversity. Doesn't mean he's impractical, you know. He's practical, but he knows how to eradicate diversity. Well, maybe the Buddha knew that too, because he became a 6th degree initiate, and I think they were both 6th degree initiates, you know, at a certain point. But the Buddha was, so Taurian, so utterly concrete and practical. He wanted to give people what really worked for them, even if they didn't have the kind of mind that could soar into the triad and beyond. His recorded statements, because he didn't write, you know. I mean, why bother when you're saying it, you know? Let someone else write it. So his recorded statements are the essence of lucidity and utter practicality. And if we have to talk about oneness or being a oneist or a homogeneous infinitist, or, you know, excuse me for third-raying those things, then we would talk about, in the Buddha's teaching, suchness. We would talk about suchness. And he was, you know, he was always in it. But he wanted people to get first things first and really taught them the practicalities of the good life, which doesn't mean that who knows what he said to his arhats, because look, the Christ was teaching initiates of the 1st degree. That's because he was a great Democrat in a way. He opened it up to everybody. The Buddha was teaching arhats of the 4th degree, himself being the head of the hierarchy already for 2,500 years, and also head of the hierarchy, very practical man, knowing what it took, and pushing the 6th degree. He took the 6th initiation with a cosmic touch of the cosmic mental plane. And I believe Shankara did that too. Now, that's a long way for us, but a little bit of a exposure to what being really is going to help us enter those very subtle realms, which one day will take us out of the universe altogether, as it ever has, but we forget, of course. Look, we don't know the reason for it all. You can make conjectures. Why should there be a universe? Why should, or many universes, or endless universes? Why should there be the endless potential of absolute infinity, none of which ever gets fully demonstrated in finite objectivity we call the universe? We're just as far now from the demonstration of absolute infinity in a finite universe as we ever have been. There's no way to say, okay, I'm starting from point X, I'm going to point Y, and now somewhere along the line, I'm closer to point Y than I was when I started at point X. You can't do that when you're dealing with real infinity. You're always in the middle, always, forever. You never move. You're always in the middle between beginninglessness and endlessness. So, I'm in many other classes that Tuya and I are offering, or that I'm offering too, or Tuya's offering by herself, whatever. We're trying to get the ABCs, because we have to learn the ageless wisdom, and it will never do to just hang out in abstraction. At the same time, it will never do to ignore abstraction as if it just didn't exist, So we're trying to give you this dual curriculum and see if it makes a difference with you apprehending that measure of reality which can be apprehended in a universe. Because look, and that brings me to what I was going to talk about tonight. And let's just see how far I go. I'm not going to go too far, unfortunately. Let's just see. I'm going to, yeah, that's a nice, we'll make that a nice red one. I was going to talk about the infinitesimal. Well, inevitably when you start talking about the infinite, it would be unfair not to talk about the infinitesimal. And I get the thought that the infinitesimal and the absolutely infinite are the same. Now, in Maya, and from the perspective of Maya, they look entirely different. And I would say this, that just as you cannot contain absolute infinity in a universe, so you cannot achieve a true infinitesimal in a universe. You get the idea, you know what direction you're going, but the shape of the universe, the boundedness of it, the finiteness of it, prevents you from containing the absolutely infinite and the absolutely infinitesimal. If I was asking you, see, because let me just say this, the infinitesimal is not a number. The simplest way to define it is like one over infinity. And that's maybe the oldest way of defining it too. And there's a high-level mathematician, and I forget his first name, his last name is Robinson. He did tremendous work with the infinitesimal, but I think more from the mathematical than from the philosophical perspective. Now, obviously, we're interested in both, and basically, I don't think he was a metaphysician. Maybe if I studied him more, I would discover that he was. Certainly Leibniz, back in the 17th century, was both an infinitesimalist, having with Newton invented infinitesimal calculus, but he was also a metaphysician, writing a book like On the Monad and so forth. So it's best to be both. a mathematician and a philosopher. And I realize that to an extent, I'm talking in a third-rate language now, but not in such a complicated way that we cannot get it, whatever our rays are. There's just something, you know, that's endlessly big and something that's endlessly little. And I call it a process. Now remember, the infinitesimal is not a number. And in a way, unless you want to put some kind of symbolic value to it and indicate a trend which you cannot follow, but it would keep going and going. And the same for the infinite. They're categorizing infinites, types of infinites, and they give you some kind of symbol for it, like the Hebrew letter Aleph with a null, a zero, or an Aleph 1, Aleph 2, Aleph 3, and on and on. So Cantor, he somehow had that language. But these are not numbers. They are trends, they are indications. If you give me, well, I'll tell you what, does anybody want to hazard a thought about what is an infinitesimal? Because I don't want to just, you know, talk and deprive you of the opportunity of taking a stab at the infinitesimal, just like the infinite. Anybody want to get into that? I know it's a bit like the thorny path of occultism, you know. What happens is you say, take a look at this path. It's filled with sharp thorns. Who would like to take their shoes off and go for a walk, you know? And when you start to consider some of these things, especially if you introduce the metaphysical component. See, a lot of mathematicians are saved. They don't have to introduce the metaphysical, philosophical component. They stay within the realm of numbers. But what does it mean to the human psyche? What does it mean to the human being that we are? What does it mean to our essential identity? What does it mean? They don't worry about that. That's some other academic's province. And maybe the people who are dealing with the so-called, his name was Moore is the writer of the book Infinity. Maybe if we're just dealing with what the infinite means philosophically and psychologically, we're not going to get into the heavy math. And we're quite happy about that. But the person that can do both, now that's a different thing. And all of us can do it. It's just a question of concentrating in such a way that we get the idea of pure being and simultaneously multiplicity, multiple myopic relativity. Multiple myopic relativity. I don't know, what can I say it does for me? I've been so busy on the outer level. And, you know, just trying to get caught up. And then tonight I began thinking about it again, and it does something. It does something that I think needs being done. You know, to think about being until one becomes it. And like I say, I think maybe the first example, you know, you'll feel it in your heart center. I'm not sure it's just a head thing. And then you will have the ability, for a little while anyway, to ignore form and its separativeness. Now look, you can't, you know, you can't go out in life and make a living in the absoluteness, or unable to distinguish one thing from another. Maya has its rules, and we have to obey them. But if we allow ourselves to go for reality, it's going to enhance our ability to deal with the Maya.
Michael. Yes, words are symbols that we use to describe our thoughts, and the symbols of these two words are generally trying to describe our lack of being able to describe them, what the symbols are. That they're, for the concrete mind, they are generally incomprehensible. And that's where we have to rise out of that concreteness into the abstractness, which is relative anyway.
Well, this is, you know, this is where the building of the so-called Antikarana comes into the picture. You know, the inner organ of light. Somehow there's a gap between where we usually live and operate and notice, and something higher, which I can't say we cognize it, I can just say we register it. We want to be those kinds of disciples who have certain higher registrations that the initiate has in the spiritual triad, monad, and beyond, until the registration is the whole universe, and I could take it beyond that too. So, you know, we know so little, and our symbols are so, you know, not wonderful, but indicative, let's just say. And if I can use a symbol as a trigger to get me into the registration of something I could not register before, then something has been accomplished. Now, I would say mentally, you know, absolute infinity has no boundaries. And basically, our God, our extra universal God, beyond the universe, is boundless in its infinitude. But now, let's look at every other thing. Every other thing, a universe, a self-registration, in the super universal world, all of those things are as well next to nothing. I kind of joke with that, you know, next to nothing. Well, you can't ever really get next to nothing. There's always going to be some interval. But you can shrink a universe through this infinitesimalizing process, ever smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller, and there's no end to it. And you can even, I've been working on this one, suppose there is no universe temporarily right now, and I'm in this super universal world which contains absolute infinitude, because it's the reflection of the absolute deity, self-reflection. I can shrink at the end of it all that boundless immensity down to the ultimate next to nothingness, which is a process which reabsorbs what used to be called boundless infinity right back into the absolute, which in a way it never left anyway. Now, you know, maybe that's one of the hard concepts, but let's just say that absolute infinity and the absolute infinitesimal are just intimately related. They're just about the same thing.
Aren't these concepts related to or limited by time and space-time?
It depends on what it does for you, triggering a leap beyond the capture of space-time. In other words, I'm interested in the words which are symbolic, that have something additional in them that is not just cut and dry space-time. It propels you beyond the space-time world. Finally, it propels you, or the whole universe, or whatever, the whole infinitude, it propels you into a state, what else can we call it, that has no space and no time. And, you know, that is one of the descriptors of the absoluteness. No space and no time.
And
no division.
This is all good because Frederick and Gloria and Stephen have written in a couple of things.
Well, that's alrighty. Let's see what we got here. Infinitesimal, immeasurably small, not zero, but must clothe an aspect of life all matter does. Well, it is in a way, it is in a way the misperception of form on the way to becoming pure being, if I can put it that way. Now, I don't have time to write it out, but every perception of form is a misperception of reality. So we're on our way misperceiving and thinking form exists, but that which we perceive is on its way to being pure reality, which is pure being and which is the absoluteness itself. Okay, all matter does. Energy as we know it in the physical plane must all contain life. Well, you know, everything is life, i.e. photon is a particle. Abraham, you're correct, Abraham, that's right. Abraham Robinson, that's it. Kind of interesting that Abram, not Abram, you know, as Blavatsky explains, the true meaning of the privative a and the word Brahm, not a Brahmin. So Abraham of the biblical character was not a Brahmin. And here we have, just an extremely lucid intellect in this man looking for the immeasurably small. And, one thing that's interesting about measurability, the word Maya, one of its definitions anyway, is that which is measurable. Now just think, what is immeasurable? Because measurability requires division. What is not divided? And the only thing that's not divided, and you can't call it really a thing, is the no thing, which is the great absoluteness. That's the only thing that's not Maya. That is not Maya, as it has no measurability. Now look, it's quite impossible to have reductions of possible measurability in a universe that go too far. Basically, something has called a halt to the scope and magnitude of whatever is perceived. And that something has to be the universal logos. Otherwise, it could just keep on subdividing on the way to infinitude, and we'd never have the great breath, and we'd never have the law of periodicity, and it would just be an impossibility. So there is what I've called in one of my books, the Infinity book, I've called it the UP, the ultimate particle event, because this particle is an event as well, and it's ultimate because the universal logos says it's ultimate. Thus far shall you go and no further. That's just a decision on the part of the ultimate, part of the universal God, universal deity. It does not continue subdivision. The only place where continued subdivision exists is in the supra-universal absolute infinitude, which is the self-reflection of the absolute deity. Then you will have, as strange as it seems, infinite subdivision without ever reaching nothingness in that state. Now, eventually, it'll all be collapsed into absoluteness. How that happens, we don't know, but there's some kind of law about related to the law of periodicity, which says, look, there is a period. There's a duality. There's a period of universe, no universe, universe, no universe. For there to be no universe, there has to be a collapse. And there's a period too, absolute infinitude, absoluteness, absolute infinitude, absoluteness, absolute infinitude, with its absolutely infinite particularization, has to collapse to the point of absorption into absoluteness. It's a tough thing to conceive, and how it happens, I'm sure, is way beyond us, but at least let's just say there is a time, well, that time is all time really, when absoluteness only exists and no extrusion, nothing additional other than absoluteness exists, is without cause, without beginning. without end. So, you know, any person writing here is opening up a can of metaphysical worms, you know, things really to be discussed. But we have to go so far that the forms within the universe count for nothing. And indeed, they are no thing. Now, like I say, the habit is with us. When I look at something and think of something, it's a thing. It's not like it doesn't exist, but it doesn't exist. It is only absoluteness which finally exists. And so everything else really is Maya, and Maya is self-observation. And that's a tough one too. Maya is self-reflection. There is in the Big Manly Hall book, you know, that Francis is going through, a picture of, is it Macrosopus? I'm not pronouncing it correctly. And Microsopus. And Macrosopus is sitting by a pond, and reflected in that pond is his image, which is the Microsopus, something like that. I'm pronouncing it just a little off. But the Microsopus is not real. And neither is the pond and anything around. The only thing that's real is the macro. But periodically, according to the law of periodicity, that reflection does arise forever, beginninglessly, endlessly. So when I read what Shankara said, well, Maya is forever, most mysterious and forever, I said, well, I better get used to it. The whole thing is Maya here, which doesn't mean that we don't do our best with it, because it is our conception of the next creative, artistic enterprise, of which there have been infinitudinous. Maybe that's why Meyer Baba, I went to his place, you know, his tree, and out there near Ojai, and looking out over a valley, and he was Pisces, I guess. He was silent for 30 years. Imagine that, no speaking for 30 years. It's a very Piscean thing to do. And he said, when he finally spoke, he said, don't worry, be happy. I said, oh, that coming out of 30 years of silence, but you can begin to see why it might be so. So here, I'm just watching this.
Friedrich writes, can we link infinitesimal to the theory of limits? And he references Isaac Newton, Gottfried Leibniz, Jacob and Johann Bernoulli, Guillaume de L'Hopital.
Yeah. Well, you know, in a way, the infinitesimal, in a practical sense, got its first exposure through these advanced mathematicians as mathematics was evolving. So yes, mathematically it can be linked, but now I'm looking at this more in a mathematical, metaphysical way, trying to say that the only thing I'm reduced to use a word like thing, the only state, whatever, which is not ultimately infinitesimal, is absoluteness. Now, they're not interested in that. They're interested in solving the areas of irregular spaces They're interested in derivatives, all the stuff that goes with normal mathematical calculus. Yes, and of course, what is called the infinitesimal is a big, big, tiny concept, a big, tiny in the evolution of their mathematics, which I don't, pretend to have studied. Well, I did study it, actually. I was in a year of with the engineers, studying calculus. And I know that it had very much a different and a practical objective. Now, what we're trying to do is to look at anything and infinitesimalize it. So crunch it, so reduce it, so non-dimensionalize it, that literally, finally, the no thing only is left. And that's it, the one and only. So in the crunching, here we are with words, but in the reduction of magnitude and scope until there's next to nothing left, and finally, nothing at all. And when I say nothing, I mean no, the no thing. That's what I'm trying to drive at, so that you can completely dissolve the universe and condense it into no thingness. Now, even though you see and your senses register these things, something in you knows in your heart that it's only one thing, regardless of the multifarious apparent differences. And that takes practice. Maybe everybody has a good starting point. I sometimes begin with people I know quite well, and then I expand. I have an exercise for you. I can give you a tiny little exercise. First of all, look at, in your imagination, someone you know very well, and perhaps this person is close to you, perhaps you love this person. Now, I'm not saying we're going to get this in a minute, okay? Now, try to get into not the form, but the beingness of this person. And of course, you will find that the beingness of this person cannot be differentiated from the beingness of any other person. Try to get into their beingness, however. It would involve, I suspect, the heart center. Now, that could take some time. But you'll know if it hits, when it hits. Now, without disturbing the beingness that maybe you have detected, And without getting caught in form, add another person with no disturbance of beingness whatsoever, even though the form is quite different. It's a very subtle thing. To reduce variety to sameness and know that you are accurate and not just playing some mental game. Now, add to this picture a mineral, a gem, a stone, something mineral. But don't get caught in the form and don't disturb beingness. Beingness is of an entirely different order than your perceptual mechanism as normally constituted would register. Now, without disturbing the beingness and ignoring the form, add a member of the vegetable kingdom, add a flower or a fruit or something that's a member of the vegetable kingdom. This means, of course, that sameness will pervade your mineral, your vegetable, or the maybe two people that you have summoned in your imagination. Sameness will be there. And now add an animal. It doesn't make any difference. It can be ferocious, big, small, attractive, repulsive. Makes no difference. Add an animal and preserve the beingness. because beingness is ever the same. And run your eyes over what you have gathered imaginatively, and whatever the shape or form in front of you, sense that the beingness of those images is the most real part. Now, there's all kinds of varieties you could do with this, all kinds of extensions of this kind of exercise. But unless you find that within you which can succeed in converting variety to sameness, you will not find true being. It's a very big step to remove quality from your consideration. Now, when you're working in a practical way, you never do that. An average human being is different from a master qualitatively. And you have to be aware that time and space separate them, and lifetimes and so forth. But there's this sameness registrar inside you. I always think it really is the heart center and the series of ascending hearts that DK sometimes talks about. So it's going to take practice, for sure. If that is what you want, and you are awakening to the third path. It's not the path of intelligence. It's not the path of love. From another point of view, it's not even the path of will. Maybe it's the path that unites the three, and we can call it the path of being. And it's out of this world. And yet, the world is it. And Gloria, I think he accomplished exactly what I am talking about. Ramana Maharshi is Vicharya, who am I, who am I, who am I? The fastest way, he called it. He knew that. He was so deeply into it. He was a very strong Capricorn person, obviously an initiate, and maybe some Aquarius too. Very deep thinker, and even a deeper beer. Knower, lover, willer, be-er. A lot of us have a lot of work to do yet before we become the be-er. So maybe the little bit about in the infinitesimal, think about that. I'm going to come back to it. Because, 70 years ago, there was this book put out, I told you about it. Maybe some of you have it, called The Family of Man, and wonderful book, photographic book. And showed people in every different state, including the Tibetan monk, like that. And it said something like, the wise man, or to the wise man, there is no great or small. So our categories here about absolute infinity and absolute infinitesimal, they are eradicating the great and the small. Finally, they don't exist at all. And when you're dealing with absoluteness, you can't say, oh, it keeps going, keeps going, keeps going, because you'll understand that you're measuring it against space, and there are never two. So when dealing with absoluteness, there's no extension whatsoever. The 17th century philosophers, they were big on what is extension? Is it real? Well, we see things spread about in apparent space, but it's not real. And in the ultimate situation, you can't even use words like that, but in the ultimate state, or in the ultimate there just isn't any big or small. And there's no distance or non-distance. We have eliminated the ability to travel, to move. Parmenides, I think, had somehow understood this. He was a pre-Socratic philosopher, pre-Platonic, pre-Socratic, and his friend or servant, Zeno, came up with these paradoxes, which really cause us to think about whether the world we perceive looks like, is really what we perceive. And yet, the no thing is not nothing. I guess I can leave you with that thought. The no thing is not nothing. Are there any, before we stop, are there anything you want to write or say? some of you have done a bit of it, and I see Vera is there, so you can speak.
Yeah, a little question on our cosmic physical level. Some people call the Buddhic subplane and up as formless, but can we say that on this really cosmic physical level?
Not on the level we're talking about. The whole universe is a form.
Yeah.
If anything is finite, which the universe is, it's a form. So, you know, the Buddhic plane is very, very low with its patterns or whatever we find there, very, very low on the scale of form, comparatively.
Yeah.
There are all these still more subtle, until we get to this something that we call a universe, which is a form.
Yeah.
But for practical purposes, yeah, compared to the lower 18 subplanes, indeed, formless when dealing with that. And even when you're looking at the higher mental plane with its causal body and its egoic lotus and all that, people say, oh, it's formless. It's not really formless, it's just a subtler form.
Yeah.
So a thing within a form cannot be formless.
That's right.
Yeah, so that's how I see it anyway, Vera.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, you bet. Well, look, friends, I appreciate your presence. I oftentimes, you know, I kind of know maybe a little bit what I'm going to talk about here. And right now we're defining terms.
And Michael.
Yes, Michael.
Following up on Vera's question about form and formless, if there are 10 dimensions, of which the cosmic planes are one of those dimensions, it could be conceivable that all 10 of those dimensions have some sort of form.
Absolutely. Let's just say that all the 10 dimensions in a universe are contained within a finite universe. So anything, let me make a principle. Anything contained within a finitude cannot be an actualized infinitude. And if it's not an actualized infinitude, it's a form. Now, those forms are probably so subtle when compared to what we normally deal with that we say, oh, it's vaporous, it's subtle, you can't contain it, whatever, but it's a form. And that goes back to what I just said, that the only non-form or no thing is absoluteness itself. All form is illusory, meaning it doesn't last. One thing that with no beginning and no end lasts forever, as we measure time, is absoluteness. Now, you know, you may wonder, what's my head doing out there in all of these abstract considerations? You know, and just to be fair, we, the Moria Federation, and in our webinars and broadcasts, we get very concrete. You know, is a country having a problem? Yes. What's the problem? Not enough education for women. Okay, you get into that. How do we solve that? It's concrete, okay? But every once in a while, if you can tolerate it, you have to open up to something quite difficult to apply on the concrete level, but I'm sure it does help our concrete applications. DK said the new schools, one of the reasons they were so necessary for humanity was that the human mind was too concrete right now, and the astral body too unstable, and the physical body too sick. And all that's supposed to help. The new schools are supposed to help all that. So if you can withstand the dual curriculum of relativity, concreteness, thingness, etc., and the no thing, then okay. Then more power to you.
And Damien thanks you. He says, great discussion. My head is melting. Great talk.
Thank you. I don't think I could deliver thoughts like this unless my head had melted a little earlier in the day. I try to see. Sorry for this, but it is an alteration of the usual way we think and the usual way we feel. So let's keep that in mind also as we study our ageless wisdom and get all the practical details Master DK wants us to absorb. Get both. You know from what he says that as an initiative, the 5th degree, maybe even, who knows, moving towards the 6th degree, that he knows all this stuff. He just, like the Buddha, he wants to make sure that we get the fundamentals first, and then we can deal with these abstractions maybe more soundly, in a better way, you know. But there's nothing wrong with the abstract mind, and it is the doorway to the intuition, where pure reason resides, and where the law of harmony prevails, and where love, wisdom is a fact. So let us, for the next 2,000 years, as that's the time allotted, develop the abstract mind. And then maybe when the 6th root race begins, and it lasts a long time, we have a doorway into the intuition. And if we make very special progress and become a master, it will happen sooner than later, just the way our masters, well, you know, Jesus, let's say, there was about 2,000 years between him being a 2nd degree initiate and him being a master. That's pretty fast, and things are moving even faster now. So just realize that attainment is possible, and no matter what condition you think you're in right now and what liabilities you think you have, those liabilities are not permanent and are incapable ultimately of stopping your progress toward reality. Thank you, Damien. Okay, and that's that. I can't say, I've had a lot of webinars today here, and I can't say that I'm particularly unhappy that our that our little session is over. Although it's, you know, it's a fascinating subject, and always odd ideas that are very close to truth are going to pop in at odd angles, and you'll say, well, I never thought of that. And then you'll realize how close to truth it is, and you'll be grateful for the pop-up, as it were. Okay, so we'll close a little closer to earth, as I always say, with the great invocation. And you know, where you are, you can say it aloud, but make sure you keep yourself on self-mute, otherwise we get all this, you know, comes in, goes out, and makes difficult comprehension. From the point of light within the mind of God, let light stream forth into the minds of men. Let light descend on earth. From the point of love within the heart of God, let love stream forth into the hearts of men. May Christ return to earth. From the center where the will of God is known, let purpose guide the little wills of men, the purpose which the masters know and serve. From the center, which we call the race of men, let the plan of love and light work out, and may it seal the door where evil dwells. Let light and love and power restore the plan on earth. Thank you, everybody. When I was an opera singer, I could do a better Om than I can now. But okay, tomorrow morning, 6 a.m., and we'll get into the science of triangles, and then in the evening, Tuya will lead the broadcast for the normal triangles meditation. And I think Michael, did I not put the science of triangles in there? I hope so. It should end with the numbers 115.
I believe that you did.
Okay, I hope it's correct.
Yes, it is
You
in
know,
there.
it's the same as, it's the same. And I'll tell you what I'll do.
It's in the chat box.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that I put the right one.
Yes, it ends in 115.
So far, so good, huh? And, excuse me, sorry. I'm one of those confirming people. I just confirm until it's,
Wednesday the 22nd.
yeah. Got quite a few registrants, and it ends in 115. Thank you. Okay, friends, lots of love from the whole team. And if we persist, we will achieve. So let's move forward. And good night from here for now. Bye-bye.